A short content warning before we begin tonight. This evening, I'm going to speak in part about gun violence. So if that's triggering or traumatizing for you, you're welcome to step out a little while. And please know that you are loved. And if you or someone in your family needs resources or someone to talk to or an outlet for grief or frustration or fear, we hope you know that you can rely on your synagogue community. Okay, so tonight I want to talk about outrage, specifically moral outrage. Not the outrage that's monetized and churned out by outrage machines of social media and the 24/7 opinion news cycle. The outrage that is the result of gross measures of injustice and bearing witness to cruelty, inaction, callousness, and crisis here and across the world. Sacred outrage that echoes the cries of our prophets. Cries which fell on ears that couldn't or wouldn't hear. Outrage that burns hot and requires constant fuel and eventually burns down in gutters. On Erev Rosh Hashanah, I spoke about joy. I tried to paint our calendar as full of opportunities for joy, in part because I think all of us could use a hefty dose of joy after a heavy year. I think sometimes we need permission to experience joy. And part of the reason that I needed a sermon about joy this year is because it has been exhausting as a human family, an American citizen, and part of the North Shore community. I've been bouncing between anger, sadness, and fear, emotions that rush together and together form the shared, sacred, compounding traumas of the past year. If you had asked me in February, I would have told you that the entire High Holy Days would have been focused on Ukraine. On February 24th, the Russian army invaded from three sides, launching rockets and sending thousands fleeing from their homes. If you asked me in February, I would have told you that we would talk about the Jewish roots and history. In Kiev, in Lviv, in Odessa, we would have shared my family's history and immigration and refugee stories. We would have to talk about the implications of cruelty, violence, ego, and despotic leadership. You remember that feeling? That early mix of dismay and anger, sadness and horror. And then on May 24th, 3 months to the day after the Russian invasion began, a horrific shooting at Rabbi Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, which stole the lives of 19 students and 2 teachers. How could this happen again, we wondered. The failures of gun legislation, failures of local, state, and federal leadership. We burned with righteous fury. Surely we would have to have laser-focused attention these high holy days on gun violence. 1 month later, June 24th, the Supreme Court issued a decision in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health. And by a vote of 6-3, the court overturned Roe versus Wade with multiple justices who had said in hearings that Roe versus Wade was settled law, voting to overturn. After years of erosion of federal protection for reproductive rights, this judicial safety net was gone. There were those who celebrated the decision, and many were left distraught, frightened, lost, resigned, and angry. The holidays they would require full attention on reproductive justice. February 24th, May 24th, June 24th, these days that felt like paradigm shifters, completely changing the landscape. Remember how broadly and wholly felt each one was? How sure we were that this would finally mark a moment of change or action, or would hold our undivided attention until the matter was resolved. And then somehow each managed to fade from view. For sure, not for everyone, but eventually they left the headlines and the front page and the water cooler. What I also remember each time was the recurring feeling of righteous moral outrage It poured us into the streets and our Twitter feeds. It led to a rash of phone calls and emails and action alerts. I felt like I was channeling Isaiah, shouting truth to power. Isaiah, who calls to us on Yom Kippur, who condemns empty words, who detests thoughts and prayers that are not accompanied by action, justice, and change. Isaiah, who rails against a machine that remains silent, a world in motion, indifferent to his plea. And maybe this is something male conditioned in me, but sometimes that anger, it made me feel powerful. I was right, and I knew it. And that anger, it exhausted me. Our prophets are inspiring in their resolve and their stories that are littered with frustration, exasperation, and exhaustion. It is exhausting to constantly feed that fire, to keep the outrage burning. It left me feeling burned out. I never had time to pause and reflect as each new crisis emerged and compounded. Yes, outrage can rattle us, awaken us, and compel us, but it's not lasting. And it's the strategy of those who resist change to wait out and outlast our outrage. No, they say. Let's not make any rash decisions. Let's wait. Let's pause till we have all the facts, hoping that our focus will wane and the next news cycle will arrive and nothing will change. They know the power of inertia and know that if they can recreate the status quo, they can win. And I share this not to call us out, but to call us in, to invite us to be curious about our reactions and our experiences so that through that awareness, we might come to a deeper understanding of ourselves and of our work. And there are 2 more dates and 2 more feelings I want to share with you. The first came 10 days before the shooting in Uvalde. On May 14th, a white man in Buffalo, New York, went to the black part of town to find and kill black people. And he did. And that day, 10 people were murdered at Tops Supermarket in Buffalo, New York. We were shocked and disgusted, horrified, truly, truly outraged. And once again, that outrage dissipated, and I started to feel something else. See, I grew up in Rochester, which is an hour east of Buffalo. I didn't spend much time in Buffalo, but that part of New York, it feels like mine. But what I also knew is that even if I did live in Buffalo, that was not a supermarket I ever would have shopped at. Not a part of town I would have ever known or wandered or explored. And that realization left me deeply uncomfortable. The tragedy felt both like it was mine, like it happened in my backyard, and so far away from my lived experience. My privilege guarded me from that violence, and I felt dismay. I was sad. And how often do we use our anger to hide our sadness? And then, of course, we come to July 4th, a moment that defies explanation. For years, we said it could happen here. After Parkland and Pittsburgh and Pomona and Colleyville, it could happen in a suburb, it could happen in a Jewish community, it could happen to a Jewish community. We said it could happen here, and we knew it was true, and then it did. This wasn't something that could happen to us. It did. It did happen to us. And observing our community, we reacted in myriad ways, in grief and in mourning, in deep, deep sadness, in fear, in defiance, in outrage, but all seeking desperately to be present, to show up for one another. Not to fix it, because we couldn't fix it, just to show up for each other. And there's a word for that moment in our tradition. It's not a word about prophetic anger or righteous indignation. And that word arrives explicitly not on a day for joy in our calendar. A day that doesn't offer or provide comfort, a day that's just uncomfortable. It's lament. The Hebrew word echa. How? Why? An exclamation that recognizes brokenness and destruction. A why that we know has no answer. Why? We read the book of Echa, Lamentations on Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, the day that commemorates the destructions of the first and second temples. It's a day of fasting, a day where we sit on the floor in sackcloth and ashes and give voice to the ruins that surround us. There is tremendous wisdom in this day. On day 305 of 5783, we won't offer any solutions. We won't fix the problems. What we will do is we will take time to sit on the floor and weep and name them. We'll make space to dwell for a moment in that discomfort, that sadness, and that pain. But critically, Tisha B'Av lasts for just a day. Our calendar does not allow us to dwell too long in the darkness. After our day of lament, we rise. And the days and weeks that follow, we begin to look for comfort. We imagine the world anew and dream of what we might create in the wake of our sadness. We see our discomfort and our sorrow. We see the nature of our lament and start to build something else. A lament is catharsis. There is healing power to lament. It's like the release after a good, deep emotional cry. Our calendar tells us that we're allowed to feel the full range of human emotions. And sometimes it takes work. And the lead up to that moment is hard and uncomfortable, maybe even traumatic. But we get to feel. And at times, the permission to feel is the end in and of itself. This day of Yom Kippur, it gives us another such opportunity. Tisha B'Av is the day for lament, and today we wonder, how will we change because of what we have felt and what we have experienced, and how the world will change because of what we can do together? And we have plenty to lament. Not to cast doom into the world or to deny our sacred tendency towards hope and towards optimism, but to see and name the reality of brokenness, sadness, loss, and fear that we experience as a human family. Our lament can be a gift if we use it. It's an awful gift, one I wish that we didn't have. And let me be clear, the trauma is certainly not the gift, but the sacred time to sit, to reflect, and articulate the lament, to give voice to sorrow, that can be a gift. Sitting in that lament and choosing to rise up from it can help us to do something. Our lament is sacred. Our lament invites us, as Rabbi Sherman spoke about on Rosh Hashanah, to show up. Not just once, but for the long road ahead. Maybe we make donations, or maybe we act in direct service, or maybe we lobby, or maybe we organize. But what we do is we rise from the depths and we ask a question. What will our lament do for the world? How will we use the experience of lament to create something new? Lament is personal. And it's communal. The book of Echa begins, Yoshva Badad. She sits alone. In lament, we often feel so alone. But in lament, we can be heard, and we can hear the stories of others. We can learn that we are not alone. And we can find strength in each other's stories. Some of us aren't ready yet. Some of us are still deep in the lament. And Tisha B'Av gives us that permission. It gives us time to sit in brokenness. It doesn't fix it or deny it. Tisha B'Av doesn't tell us, don't worry, don't be sad, don't be upset. It allows us to just be. What's your lament? What needs to cry out from your soul? During our congregational observance of Tisha B'Av each year, we leave quiet time to reflect and write a lament. This is part of what I wrote this past year. I fear that I'm losing faith in people, losing faith in goodness. I want my optimism back. The world feels perpetually on fire. We've lost trust in each other and lost our ability to see ourselves as connected. I want to rebuild. How do we ensure that we don't resign to outrage that burns hot and then fizzles? How do we build something lasting? Share our stories and build power together to overcome the forces of inertia and the status quo. Build strategy that doesn't just rage into the void, but gives us an opportunity to take the long, hard road towards change. And then Yom Kippur asks us a question. Who are you? What will you do in the face of a broken world? How will we look squarely at our discomfort, our pain, our grief, and allow it to affect us? Not with a quick-fire rage that will soon turn to ashes and embers. We have time today. We have time to reflect on our lament, to sit in it, and to see what it stirs in our soul. To rise from grief and lament, not towards anger. We've been there, and we know that it can't sustain us. We rise towards return, to community, to being heard, to the power of shared sacred story, to the sustained work toward the good. Today, on the most sacred day of the year, out of anger, out of sadness, out of grief, and out of fear, we rise. We rise.
We rise, humbly hearted rise, won't be divided, rise, with spirit to guide us, rise. In hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here. In hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here. And we rise. All of the children rise. Elders with wisdom rise. Ancestors surround us, rise.